If you ask most Japanese and Chinese learners what the most difficult part of those languages are, the majority will probably say the writing system. Just to attain basic reading fluency, you have to be able to accurately recognize and read thousands of these squiggly pictures. The only problem is many learners don't take advantage of more effective ways of learning them, and thus never make much progress and ultimately give up. Of course, no matter how you do it, it's going to take a long time. But if you take on board some of the tips I introduce in this video, I believe you can significantly reduce the amount of time it takes to learn kanji. All the examples I use in this video are for Japanese, as that's the language I have most familiarity with, but all these tips equally apply to Chinese as well. 1. Use flashcards. Many viewers of this video will already be familiar with this, but using flashcards or any sort of spaced repetition system optimizes the memorization process by forcing you to recall the piece of information you want to remember at spaced intervals. Say there's a symbol you want to remember. At first, as it's not properly entrenched in your memory still, you'll probably forget it if you don't force yourself to recall it again soon after, like the next day. Now that you've reviewed it once again after a short interval, its hold in your memory becomes firmer, meaning that you can leave a longer space of time before you need to review it again, maybe 4 days this time instead of 1. The idea is to repeat this over and over as the intervals grow larger and the information becomes a part of your permanent memory. This is far more efficient than spending all your time reviewing thousands of bits of information every day, or leaving a too large interval between reviewing a piece of information and thus having to constantly relearn things you've forgotten. Having to physically make flashcards and manually manage the intervals yourself can be a pain, so luckily there are free programs that do it for you. This makes it incredibly easy to get set up and get started creating and learning new flashcards. 2. Use mnemonics. I've already touched on this in my previous video about kanji, but using mnemonics is an extremely powerful way to memorize kanji, or anything really. Your brain loves stories. Stories are how we interpret and understand the world. No matter how much you try to force yourself to memorize with rote memorization, unless you have some kind of emotional connection with the information, it will be a struggle. I explain how I'd recommend going about this in this video, so I'd recommend checking it out if you're interested. 3. Read. This one might sound obvious, but you are not going to get anywhere with study alone. In order to properly learn the kanji, you need to get exposed to it in natural contexts. In the same way that reading more helps you recognize and produce correct spelling in English, reading with kanji does the same. Even if your level is too low to read authentic material made for natives, using text simplified for children or adult learners can help as well. One enormous added benefit that comes with lots of reading input is that you'll develop a very deep and intuitive sense for recognizing kanji. You'll naturally associate meaning with the symbols without having to consciously recall meaning, and you'll be able to distinguish subtle differences between similar looking kanji, often without being consciously aware of what those differences are. They'll just look or feel different, even if you can't articulate why. 4. Be aware of it in daily life. I've been able to read kanji for quite a few years now, but I never properly learnt to write them, so I've been focusing on learning to write them these past few months. One thing I started doing a few months ago was take some moments throughout the day to be aware of a symbol and notice how it's constructed and what components it's made up of. So for example, if I'm on the train and I see a sign written in kanji, I'll mentally copy it and write all the kanji in my mind. And if there's a symbol I've not yet learnt to write, I'll make a mental note of how it's written, which makes it much easier to learn when it comes up later on. By doing this only a few minutes a day, I've noticed my ability to recall and learn the writings of kanji has skyrocketed. This can obviously be used in a similar way for kanji recognition as well, not only writing. Even if you're not living in the country your language is spoken, you're still being exposed to kanji every day through your immersion. So you could, for example, take a few minutes each day during your reading practice to pay attention to the way the kanji are put together. I wouldn't recommend doing this for more than a few minutes at a time though, as this can get boring fast and deprive you of any enjoyment you might get from reading. 5. Learn them in a logical order. So like most terrorist groups, kanji are made up of radicals. Radicals are basically a set of individual components which can be combined to create kanji. Then, oftentimes, individual kanji are combined with other radicals or even other kanji to make more complicated kanji. The easiest way to go about learning them is obviously to start with the individual components and then learn in order from simplest to more complicated. It makes more sense to learn this character and this before you learn this. Likewise, if you already know this character, then it's a lot easier to learn this one, since you're just combining parts that you already recognize. The resource I mentioned earlier, remembering the kanji, as well as this one for Chinese, is a good way to learn them in this order, and I'm sure there are other resources if you look around. 6. Learn the readings in the context of words. It might seem useful to try and memorize the different common readings for each character individually, but I think this is a very cumbersome and inefficient way to do it. This is because if you're able to read, the way you read the symbol is entirely dependent on the information you receive from the surrounding context. Let's take this symbol. When it's paired with this symbol, it's read as jaw, but when there's a ni after it, it's read as tsune. Because you rely on the context and surrounding information, it makes more sense to learn the reading for that character in that context as you come across it, instead of confusing yourself by trying to associate multiple readings with one individual character out of context, then having to remember which reading to use for each context. It will only require more effort and time for less return. Eventually you will naturally develop a sense for all the different readings if you learn them in context anyway. Trying to learn different readings without their associated meanings and context is just overly complicated and far less effective. All the tips I gave in this video should make the daunting task of learning kanji somewhat easier and quicker. I hope you found it helpful, and thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.